Some people in this world are on the front lines of the struggle between good and evil, and some, like us, bear witness. I'm Therese Apel.
And I'm Nicole Crowell. You may have heard us as we worked on stories and series about law enforcement and crime. And it's safe to say we've seen some of the best and worst of human nature.
We decided there's no greater honor than bringing you the stories of the men and women who seek out the monsters, who speak for the victims, and who put the pieces together on some of the biggest Mississippi crime stories of our time.
Welcome to Investigation Homicide.
Hey everybody, welcome to Investigation Homicide. I am Therese Apel, your host, and we have Amanda Johansson in today as our co-host. Amanda?
Hi, everyone.
She was saying earlier that it's the kind of week where you don't even really know what day it is, but Thursday I always know what day it is because we're here.
Yeah. But this week has just been creeping along.
Well, it's Thursday.
Yes.
That's a good start. So today we have a special guest. You know, usually we try and talk to an investigator or, a coroner or a prosecutor, someone who worked a case. But on occasion, we have somebody who's even closer than that. And today we have Vicki Moak. She is from Brookhaven, Bogachita. And so she's kind of my homie a little bit. She is the mother of Zach Moak. And if you know anything about officers down in Mississippi, that's a name you can't miss. He's got a story. And now she is the founder of Warriors of the Badge. And she is helping other first responders families all over the state. So, Miss Vicki, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and it's always fun for me to have somebody that I kind of feel like, I mean, we didn't know each other when everything happened, but I feel like we're from the same place, sort of.
We've been through a lot together.
We certainly have.
And talking back and forth and different things.
That's right. So, for the people now I know that in law enforcement, it's so funny because there are people that I will be talking to them about something. They'll say, well, you know who Vicki Moak is? I always, yeah, I do. And so they'll be talking about Warriors of the Badge or something that you're doing that's helping people. Give us an overview of kind of what brought you to where you are now. I mean, we kind of talked about it, but in your words.
Well, what brought me here was, as it says, Zach Moak was my son, who was a police officer in Brookhaven. And 2018, September 29th, he and his partner, James White, were both killed in the line of duty. And, as a mother of a police officer, you put that in the back of your mind and you think about it. But when it came that morning, it was shock. I didn't realize how much grief and how long the shock lasted right off the bat. But it brought me to thinking about right after he passed away. I sat down and I thought, and I said, what does a family do? What does a mother do when that husband is killed in the line of duty? Yeah. And they have small children? That father was their hero, going out to fight crime every night. And I got to thinking, I said, I knew God wanted me to do something long before, and Zach knew it too. But I didn't know until I really sat down and thought. And the only thing I could come up with is, if I can give them a little extra money, close to a month's salary, at least they may know they can pay their bills for a month and be home and guide their kids through this time of trauma.
Absolutely. Well, and it's something that I know that you have done so well. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Miss Vicki, tell us about Zach. When he was a kid, did he know already he wanted to be a police officer?
No. As a matter of fact, he was a mechanic. He went into trade school and worked at the Ford place, and he was doing that right along, and he come in one day, and he told me that he was going into law enforcement. And I was like, well, when? And he said, tomorrow. I was like, Zach, now what's the problem? What did you wait so long to tell me what? I don't know. But I told him, I said, you knew I wasn't going to talk you out of it, but the one thing I was going to ask you, is this where your heart is? Is this really what you think God is calling you to do? And he looked at me, he said, yes, Mama, I really do. I really do. And I said, well, okay. I said, I'll be your biggest cheerleader, but I don't like it. I don't like it. I know there's things that could happen, but I said, I'll always be here for you. But that's what he called me. He was going into the reserves with the sheriff's department down
Sure.
there. So he was starting his training the day after. And so that's, but that was typical Zach. He would wait until the last minute. He'd know, but I think he thought I was going to talk him out of it, but I didn't.
Yeah. You know, I remember, and this is just when you said this, it made me think of my mom always worried about me until one day in 2012, I called her and I said, Mom, the Clarion Ledger sent me down to the coast to cover Hurricane Isaac. And she said, so you're going into the hurricane? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, okay. And I said, aren't you kind of worried? And she's like, I figured out finally, that God is going to take care of you or he's not, but there's not a thing I can do about it.
That's it.
She said, like, basically, as a parent, that's kind of what you got to
That's what you have to do.
So he's doing this, and obviously you already said you didn't like it, but it was his dream. What as he's getting into this, I'm sure he's telling you about kind of things that he's done or, think trainings that he's gotten. What are your thoughts as it goes along?
As it goes along, well, we went through the reserve, and they do that right at the sheriff's office, but they have their own little, and really, I guess really in the back of my mind, I thought it was best that I didn't think about it too much, but I always told him, I said, you just know your mama's praying for you, and I will always pray for you. And, he went into the reserve, went with the sheriff's department. He mainly did football games and such as that. And he was still working at the Ford place. And then he come and tell me, he said, well, I'm going to Wesson. I'm going to work up there. And, we talked about it. And he was going to go in nights, the 3 to 11 or whatever shift. Sure. And he said, I got it covered. Somebody's going to cover for me just long enough for me to get from the Ford place to Wesson. And so he moved from sheriff's department to Wesson PD.
And I want to say for anyone that knows that area, the Wesson overnight or the night shifts are kind of like a rite of passage. I feel like I've known so many officers that kind of did this same trajectory where they start off as a reserve, they work Wesson, and then they go on to either full-time sheriff's department or Brookhaven.
Yeah. He was there probably at least a year. And he was working there, and one night he came to the house, whatever, and I told him, I said, Zach, I said, you're working 2 full-time jobs. And I said, you're going to need to do something. I said, the PD, they're going to need you. You're going to wear yourself out. I said, you're going to wear yourself out working. And I said, plus 2. I said, when are you going to meet that just right little girl?
Right.
Or whatever. I said, the only way I see it right now, she comes through a roadblock and throws you her number, I said, but I said, you need to make up your mind. And it wasn't too long after then that they called him to come to work at Brookhaven.
Good deal. Well, now Amanda is a detective at Clinton Police Department, but obviously you've worked patrol. You came up through the ranks. When you become a police officer, I mean, we always, there are the people that say things like they knew what they signed up for and things like that. Mm-hmm. Is that real? Or do you just think, well, it happens, yes, but it'll never happen to me?
I think that most officers, like in the back of their mind, they know that's a possibility. But until it hits close to home, until you have someone that you went to the academy with or someone that you worked with, it really isn't real. Mm-hmm. I think until you experience it, it's just that will never happen to me, like you said. Mm-hmm. And really, you're just working on the road and driving fast and
having a blast.
And that kind of stuff doesn't even cross your mind because really, if you don't experience it, it's not real.
And I feel like until William Durr, it didn't even seem like a possibility in Lincoln County.
No, not at all. Not at all. And Zach came to the house that morning to tell me what had happened. And he said, we were patrolling all night trying to find him. And, it still in the back of your mind, you stop and you think, okay, it hits. But you always think about it as a mother, as a wife, or whoever. But, if it will consume you if you allow it to.
Yes.
Because you know God makes no mistakes. He's, what's going to happen is going to happen, and there's not much you can do about it. So you just put it in the back of your mind, and you pray you don't ever have to go through it, really.
Sure. And I feel like I need to go ahead and say, Miss Vicki, I probably won't make it through this one without crying. We had Brendan Adams here a couple of months ago, and we talked about William Durr and that situation. So for the viewers and listeners, William Durr was a Lincoln County deputy that was killed in a spree. A suspect that I don't name unless I have to killed 8 people over that night at 3 different scenes. And Durr was somebody that was very well loved. He was, just a great guy that worked with kids. That I always say with every department where you have an officer down, almost every department, if you could put your finger on the one that you don't want to lose, and you could say, God, not this one. So often that's the one, and that's the way Durr was. So that shook all of us. It brought it home. It can happen here. And it was roughly a year later that, a little over a year later. So talk to me about, as a mother with a son who's a police officer, how do you, and I'm going to take you back to that part before September of 2018. How do you pray? Like when you're talking to God, how do you get there? And I'm going to bring it back to that in a minute. But
I'd always tell him I pray for his protection, but I pray and as I pray nightly now, I can't call every officer I've ever met.
Right.
But I always tell them, I said, you are prayed for, and I pray for protection, but I pray for discernment too. And I told Zach, I said, you don't always have to be a hero, and you don't always have to work it alone. And I said, if you're heading somewhere, and I said, that little still small voice tells you or leads you to believe that something's not quite right. I said, don't be afraid to call and say, I may need somebody to, some backup here. Yeah. I said, that's God telling you. I said, always listen to that still small voice, and always don't be afraid, and don't think it's that you're not who you think you are just because you ask for help or may go that route. And I would say that to any of the officers out here, because sometimes God speaks in different ways. You got to be in tune to listen.
Right. Now, one of the pictures that I have seen of Zach that, Miss Vicki, changed my life. It was him with a little sign that he made for, was it his niece or nephew?
It was his nephew, Cohen.
Tell that story if you don't mind.
Yeah, Cohen just loved police officers. And as a matter of fact, before then, Sabrina, my niece, had called Zach and asked him to come to their house for Christmas, for my sister's house. And he went in uniform, and Cohen was afraid of him. He was very shy, but he'd sit there and he'd snuggle with his mom, and his mom would say, what's that? And he'd say, that radio. And Zach sat there and talked to him and spent the Christmas morning with him, and that was special to him, for him to have that police officer come and see him Christmas. But he was, I guess, riding around one night or whatever, and he had his a legal pad there, and he wrote Cohen a note, and he said, as you are sleeping at night, I will always be watching over you. And, but that was Zach. He loved kids. And, at that time, Chris and Savannah had Avery, and she was just his heart. He loved her, and all I had to do was I'd call and I'd say, oh, I'm coming to town. I thought I would go eat or do this or do that. And he'd say, I don't think so. I'd say, well, I got Avery with me. Okay, what time can you be here? He was ready to go then. So I told him, I said, that little girl stole Zach's heart. But he loved her. But yes, he was, and I talk to people now that talk about how sweet he was.
Yeah.
And how, he had the same monotone voice or whatever, that they said he was just so easy to talk to and easy to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't, and I'll go ahead and say I didn't know Zach past, probably we met once or twice, but after the fact, I always get to know these guys really well. And that's what everybody said about him, was just, like I said, pick one. Pick one that you would beg God, not him. And it was Zach.
Yeah.
So had he told you about James before? I mean, did you know James?
No, I didn't know James. And, after he was killed, I always felt bad because, people would talk and they'd say things. And I was at the PD one day, and one of the officers was there, and I said something to him, and I said, Zach didn't share a lot with me. I said, I would see something in the paper, and I'd say, Zach, did you know this happened? Were you there? No. You don't know anything about it? No. I even asked him, I said, can I have a scanner? No. Well, Miss Elizabeth in our Sunday school class has a scanner. What's your call number? I don't know. And he told me, he said, Miss Vicki, he said, I did that to my mama. He said, I wanted to protect her. Yeah. And I know that was the way Zach was, that he loved me. I mean, he was a mechanic, but if he was going to work on his car, he was going to call and talk to me about it. Well, all he had to do.
Yeah.
He knew he could always pick up that phone and call me and depend on me to do whatever needed to be done to help him out.
But he didn't want you worrying about him.
But he didn't want me worrying about him.
Right. Now, one of the things about this case that has been just kind of, and you know how this works, Amanda, that's been kind of different is that the suspect did not go to trial. I mean, I realize a lot of times the suspect is killed. In this case, he was not. He just pled guilty, and so we never learned out loud a lot of the details. And I understand there are some that we may want to talk about and some that we may not. But Amanda, talk about how that process works when you have a situation like this. And then, okay, so we know, and we'll get into it, but we know there was an incident that night, and we know we had 2 officers that died, and then we know what kind of leaked out in the press. But how does it work with the backside of that case when you're getting ready to take it to trial, but maybe it does or doesn't go?
Yeah, so in any instance where someone loses their life, it's automatically classified as a homicide, whether officer involved or not. And once you have concluded the investigation, it then gets presented to grand jury. So it goes to the district attorney's office because it is a felony. It gets presented to grand jury, and they hear the facts of the case and determine there is probable cause to move forward with an indictment and possibly trial. And then there are a million different steps in between the indictment, or what they call a true bill, and a trial. And this is where the attorneys talk back and forth, and they can make a plea deal. The person can just go ahead and plead guilty. And at that point, usually there is some back and forth and a little bit of, for lack of a better term, leniency, because they are kind of making it easy, just pleading guilty as opposed to taking it all the way to trial. Whereas typically once you get to trial, everyone's real annoyed that they're at trial. And so you tend to get a harsher punishment. So yeah, people, if they want to plead guilty, then it never makes it to trial. A lot of times it doesn't make it into the newspapers unless it is kind of leaked or there's a press release in reference to them pleading guilty and like a sentencing of whatever their punishment is going to be.
Well, and I can say that what you see in a press release is not even an iota of the actual story.
Right.
And that's why in so many of these bigger cases, you wait on that court date because we don't know what happened. And in some cases, you need to know because who were the players, what was involved, what happened. To me, Ms. Vicki, the thing that has always stuck with me was that Zach was fearless and he was a hero.
Yes.
And you should be proud.
Yeah. I saw it when we watched the body cam.
Yeah.
Um,
I have not been able to bring myself to do that.
Yeah. When I watched it, I saw that he didn't give up. And, even though, he had, James was killed first right there. Mm-hmm. And Zach had him down with his foot in his back. And he was telling him to show me your hands and give me the gun. And he kept telling him that. And at one point in time, he turned and he was talking about his mouth. He had been shot. And he said, I know, but show me your hands and give me the gun. So he pulled his hand out. It's just he was sneaky enough that when he went to roll over, he pulled his hand back up under his stomach. And when he rolled up, that's when he shot Zach.
Now,
And
let's talk about that day because they were working an overnight shift. Is that right?
right.
Do you remember anything about that day leading up to that? Did you talk to Zach that day?
No, that night, that Friday night, I thought about it. Something come. He said, I was like, call Zach. And I was like, you've seen him 3 times this week.
Right.
Because we went up and we had Avery and we took her shopping. And we went to his house and he said, I got leftovers, come over and eat. So we went over to eat and he asked me, he said, are you going to stay? He wanted Avery and I to spend the night. And I said, well, I don't have clothes and we're going to church in the morning. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, you're going to bed and you're not going to get up until time to go to work anyway. I said, we'll meet you up here in the morning and we'll go have breakfast. And so Avery and I went and had breakfast with him. And then that Thursday, Savannah had something come up and she had to come over and go to the doctor. And so I went and we sat there. And when I left him, Avery was up in his lap and she wanted to watch a shark movie. So he turned a shark movie on. I had to go to work and they were up in the, in the recliner together. She was watching the shark movie with him. And so that Friday night I thought about it and I said, you've already talked to him. And so, but I really don't know because a lot of the times it was quick because he was going to work. I'd call him when he got out of the shower and I'd tell him, I said, I'm praying for you now. He'd say, okay. And I'd say, I love you. And he'd say, I love you too, Mama. So, but I think it was just one of those things. Maybe that night I just didn't need to.
Yeah. Well, and tell us about, he was a man of faith, correct?
Yes.
What was his relationship with Christ like?
I believe his and Chris's runs about parallel. He knew him. He knew what that Jesus had died for him on the cross. I remember when he was saved and how on fire he was right there to begin with and everything. But mainly where I see it is when I see people out here. I saw one of the deputies back about 2 or 3 months ago. We had the fair at the Exchange Club, and I'm a member now. So they put me over the kitchen, so I was there and he was there, and I leaned over and I looked at him. I said, "Now tell me your name," and he told me because I remember faces, but I don't remember names. And I said, "Okay." I told him who I was, and he was in the ER that morning, and everything. And he had. And he told me, he said, he said, we would come up here and run when he had went through the training with Zach for the sheriff's department. He said, we'd come up here and run every day or so many times a day. And he said, Zach would always, and I'd had a few other ones tell me, Zach was fast. Mm-hmm. Him and Chris both were very fast. And he would finish his run and he would go back. And he'd see somebody slacking or whatever, getting tired, and he'd go and he'd run and he would be telling them, come on, you can do it, you can do it. He said he would come back and he said he would encourage us. He said Zach not only wanted to succeed, he wanted everybody to succeed with him. Yeah. And when I hear things like that, and I've heard things like that through time about how he cared and how he went this extra little bit, that's how his love for Christ come through. Yeah. Was for him loving other people.
He had the gift of encouragement, for sure.
Had the gift of encouragement. And one of his good friends, Jason Blake, the one that was killed, he told me after Zach died, he said, Zach could get on the phone or talk to somebody, and he said they would start from the morning when they got up until this happened. And he said I stop and think about that. And he said, I wanted to be more like Zach, because he said, I would be sitting there going, just tell us what happened. And he said Zach would sit there and listen and shake his head and listen to the whole full story. And he said, I'm trying to be more like that, to where I can just listen. And I think that's where people felt that comfort and ease with him, because he did. He stood there and he was, right then, it was all about them. It wasn't about him. It was all about them.
Yeah. Now, on September 29th, 2018, they take this call. If I'm not mistaken, it was a shots fired call.
Yes.
Okay, walk us through, if you want to, what you want to talk about that night.
Okay, I know it was. I think maybe James got the call first, or because that was his backup. And as we, I guess as we watched the body cam, Zach pulled in first, and what was not just the body cam, we looked up and there was somebody there in the neighborhood that had cameras up that gave. So we saw James pull up. We saw Zach was right in behind him, and they got out. And Zach walked away from James, and he came back and he said, "There's a blood trail. There's blood over here." And it was leading up to that shed.
Yeah.
And so right when they walked up there and James tucked his head to look in, that's when Marquise shot at him.
Yeah. And there's been some discussion, and I think that this is something that would have been a discussion at trial, but there was a question at that point of whether Marquise Flowers, the shooter, was in his right mind, because he had been shot, and he had been shot in the head and, in the face area. So did he know what he was doing when he shot James, was the question that some people were asking. But I think the actions that he took with Zach showed that he very much did know what he was doing.
He did know. He, even when we went to court that day, he claimed he did not know. And, he was a 6-time felon.
Yeah.
A cop by now.
Yeah.
And, somebody coming to do you harm is not going to put their foot on your back and ask you to give the gun up. If they meant you harm, they were not even going to give you that chance. They did not want that gun. They were going to take your life. So he knew full well. He just didn't intend to go back to jail.
Right. I think one of the things that bothered me the most, everything about this case bothered me, but I've covered several cases where a law enforcement officer who showed mercy ended up paying the price for it. Yes. And Zach would have been well within his right to have shot Flowers. Once James is down, it's almost there. That's almost just a given. You killed an officer 99 times out of 100, you're gonna die. And so that was, to me, always just kind of the what if in that. But that's who Zach was he's going to do it by the book. He's going to do it right. And if there's not, if I've got you in a position where I can take you in, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, and that's what my son said long before we saw anything. He told me, he said, Mama, Zach had mercy on him, and Zach did. And, it's just awful that a judge would let a 6-time felon out to walk the streets again. Yeah. After that many times, either you've learned your lesson or you haven't, and evidently he hadn't. But, he claimed he did not, but he knew. He was in his right frame of mind. He might have been scared, but he knew that Zach was an officer. They went in with their alley lights on. He knew. And he could hear the chatter. He could hear the chatter over the radio.
I think also that, throughout this, you had multiple things at work. Of course, the area was still reeling from the death of William Durr. I was actually in North Mississippi at the second Jessica Chambers murder trial at the time. So I remember when it happened and I got the call, I started calling, I need somebody who is going to do this right, and so I called a couple of Jackson reporters that I knew would handle it correctly, because these are my people. This is Brookhaven. And I just remember getting on the on Facebook Live and just being like, guys, I just need to report that 2 officers are down. I don't know who they are, but Brookhaven, I just wish I could be there. And, that was the hardest part for me that morning. But then, like I said, as I learn about these guys and I learn who they were, James was a military veteran. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the case, and of course Zach, just Zach's personality, and it could be that because I didn't know him, but I feel like this is real. He was larger than life. There were so many people that just knew him and loved him because of, I mean, he was fun, he was funny, but he could be serious, and he was that mercy that he showed in his last moments. I think people here on earth would say, well, he shouldn't have done that. But you and I, all of us as believers, Jesus himself said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
That's it.
And Zach
And
did
he
it.
still could have, because Zach, even up until because the bullet nicked his carotid artery, and so even when he was standing there, and I was told he did what he was trained to do. Once he was shot, he retreated back behind a vehicle, but he wasn't there. But he went behind it. He came back out. He went and he grabbed James's hand, reached down and grabbed his hand, and he was pulling, and you could see Marquise over there with his gun. He had it pointed to him, so he had every chance, even at that point, to do it. But he hung on to James, and he was steadily. When he went down right there. And I just wish Marquise would have rolled over, gave him his gun, and let that be it.
Yeah. Because either way, by that point, Marquise was going to prison.
Yeah.
So he ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder and getting 2 life sentences to serve concurrently. Of course, that means he avoids the death penalty.
Yes.
At this point, obviously, you hear all these stories of different mothers who have lost children and who have thoughts about their child's killer. Do you think about Marquise?
Really, I don't. It wasn't me. I know it was God within me or Christ, that I forgave him a long time ago. Because I knew if I didn't, I couldn't carry on. I knew my son, Chris, needed me. And I said, I can't be here for Chris if I let this consume me. Because that was going through Zach's death was hard. But seeing my son, there was 16 months difference in them.
Wow.
We lived out in the country, so they played together. They were together, and they talked to each other about everything. I know, and there's things that I know that I probably won't ever know about. But to see him go through what he went through, because it just tore him up. And so with Marquise, I just gave it to God. Got to take care of him in the end. And as a matter of fact, Daryl, James's father, and I were talking months after then. And I think it's a man thing that they have trouble letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I told him, I said, Daryl, just think. I said, we don't know what God's got in store for Marquise. I said, but just think if he gets in there and all of a sudden he has this moment that he finds Christ. And I said, he ends up being somebody there in prison that leads many people to Christ. I said, our sons would not have died in vain. And I know if Zach was alive, that's what he would have wanted. He would have wanted him to carry on, and that's what Zach would have told me. He would have looked at me and he would have said, Mama, you get up. You get up. And you go on with your life. But with the Warriors, when he came in with William, and it wasn't too long after then, he came to the house, and I told him, I said, Zach, I said, God is asking me to do something, and I have no idea what it is, but I'm praying about it. And even a few months before he died, I told him, I said, I'm still praying. I said, I'll forget about it and just let it go, and he'll bring it up. And I said, I talked to him about it, and I said, I have things going through my head, and some of that doesn't feel right. I don't know. And I said, it may not be nothing. It may just be to pray for y'all. But after he died, I could hear him in my head, "Mama, you take care of those men."
And you
'Cause
know
he,
that that was God preparing your heart
yeah,
too.
yeah. I told my brothers the other night we was all together, and I told them, I said, I look back and I go back to over a year before, and I said I was having feelings and emotions that I never had before, and I was like, God, I don't know what you're doing, but but as I look back at it now, God loved me enough to prepare me to let him go.
Yeah. Well, and so, when all this is going on, obviously, um, you absorb the shock, then you deal with the grief, and then at some point there's a sense of purpose that comes from this journey that God's kind of taken you on.
Yes.
When is it that you say, "Okay, God, I see what you're preparing me for"? Because as much as we hate it, as believers, we understand that sometimes God does something like this to kick off something else. As a matter of fact, to go back to Marquise, I just posted a thing on my Facebook today that said, part of I can't remember how it's phrased, but basically the very people that the Apostle Paul martyred, that he killed himself, were cheering him into heaven when he died.
Yes.
And I feel like in this picture, if Marquise were to have a conversion, then I think the first one to meet him there is going to be Zach.
Yeah.
And I think that God, as we talked about, he was laying this out. When was it that picture came in your head that, okay, this is what he's telling me?
As far as to do at that
Yeah,
point,
to do Warriors of the Badge.
when I walked out of the funeral, that was it. I saw those men standing over the coffin, and I could hear it just as plain. And that's what it was. Mama, you take care of them. You take care of them. And I can say the Blue Line family has been so good that um, it's grown. So, a lot of them call me Mama Moak, and I don't mind that. I don't mind what age you are. But, when I still, now I'll go someplace and I'll be walking up to one of the officers going to introduce myself. I know you. And I'll go, okay, really? And they wouldn't have met me, but they just know of me. But, I want these officers now to know that they got a woman that God chose. And here I am. I'm not young. And that's what I tell them. I said, you're going to have to give me the strength and the guidance and the heat. I'm not a spring chicken. What am I going to do? But he does. He gives it to me. And as long as I'm around, I want them to know that there's somebody that loves and is there and will pray for them. And if there's ever a need, I always tell them, I said, if you have anything, you just call me. You let me know.
Well, and I can go back through our messages, and almost every time there's been a first responder, not just police, but fire, EMS, I've gotten a message from you like, do you know how to get in touch with their people? And it's because you're trying to help them through that thing you've gone through.
Yes. We, last year, I don't know if you, Katie Pipkins.
Yeah. Yeah, the EMS. She was a paramedic or an EMT?
I don't know exactly.
Okay.
But her, they just went through the trial with her, the one that ran over her. He got, I think, 20 years. Yes. I think it was something along in there. So I talked to her mom, and I told her, I said, well, let us get, I have events coming up. I said, let me get over these events. And I said, we're going to meet in Laurel, and we're just going to, we're going to celebrate. I said, we're going to talk. And I said, we may cry, we may do whatever. I said, but we're going to make a day of it.
Yeah.
I said, tell your husband you'll be home when you get home.
And that's what you need.
More often than not, kind of at least in law enforcement and the things that I have seen, once the funeral is over, all the officers just kind of, they go back to work. The calls stop coming in to the family to check on them, because that's just not how law enforcement is trained. We're trained to carry on. We've still got to do a job. And so I love that God gave you a mission as soon as you walked out of the funeral, because that is so needed, because that is when the families need help the most, because I've always heard that it's just such a haze from the time of whatever incident happened to through the planning of the funeral and the actual funeral itself. It's not until after that they actually have to sit in the things that have happened. And so that is when they actually need people who are reaching out, who are offering to help, whether it be with financially or food or emotionally, whatever. So I love that that's exactly what God called you to do.
Yeah, and when that happens, you stop and you think, and I prayed about it for a while. And I prayed because, and then the idea come up to my head. And so I got up one morning and I didn't have to work. And I said, well, get up and go to town. Because, with me, I didn't know how to do any of this. And so I went up and met with a lady in the courthouse. And I told her, I said, I'm wanting to set up a foundation or whatever and I told her what I wanted to do. And I said, but I don't know how to do it. I said, I had went to see Joe Cox and he wasn't in. I said, so can you point me in a direction so somebody can kind of guide me? And she made a phone call and she said, meet me here, in about an hour. And so I met her and I didn't walk in. It was Max Haley, CPA. Never met him. First time he'd ever laid eyes on me. And I went in and he said, now what are you wanting to do? I said, well, I want to set up a foundation. I told him what I wanted to do. And I prayed that morning before I went up there. And I said, Father, this is not what you have in mind for me. I said, show me. I said, but I can miss you. I said, and this is something I can't miss. I said, so you hit me hard. You hit me hard to where I know, okay, this is not for you, Vicki. Hit me hard. And so I went in and I told him what I wanted to do. And, oh, my goodness, he named off this list of stuff I was going to have to do. And I was like, I could feel the blood leaving my face. And I was sitting there and he was telling, I said, I don't have the money. I don't have the know-how to do this. I don't even know. I can't do this. And I was saying, thank you, Lord. I said, thank you. In my head, I was saying, thank you, oh, thank you. You're showing me this is not what I need to do. And no sooner than I got those words out of my head, Max Haley looks at me and he says, Miss Vicki, you know what? I've done this before. I can set this up for you and I'll donate all my time.
Oh, wow.
And, I just
that's the hit God was sending you.
Yeah, that's the God. And I was like, oh, my goodness. And I was like, okay. And I got out to the car and I laid my head back and I said, God, do you really think, am I really ready for this? Am I really ready? But he's been with me since then. He takes care of everything. He won't take pay. Yeah. So.
Well, he's a hero too.
Yeah. So when I asked God to hit me, he hit me. So.
Yeah. Well, and so talk to me about, obviously, you have sat with some people through some hard times.
Yeah.
For some people, that's therapeutic. And for some people, it just kind of puts more salt in the wound. How have you dealt with that as you've done that through the years?
Well, when something like this happens and I'm trying to get in touch, one thing I tell the people that I get in touch with, somebody says, okay, I can reach out. I said, you ask them how they want to handle it. And some of them have just told me, mail the check.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm fine with that. And some I have met, and hugged and, and one thing I always tell them, I said, it's not an easy road. And the grief comes in waves. Mm-hmm. I said, you'll be fine. You can be fine 1 minute, crying the next minute. And I said, and I tell them, I said, I wish I could give you an answer and help you through it. I said, but that's all I can say is but I'd always tell them that they always got my card. I always told them that if you need anything, let me know. If you need to talk, I said, call me. We'll talk, whatever you need. But, each time I go out and I hand out a check, that's my healing.
Yeah.
That's my healing.
So I guess at this point, and when I ask you, do you keep account of how many people you've helped, or?
I did back a couple of months ago because I hadn't kept up with it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was close to 40 that we had helped in the state, and we've given out, which I got a couple more checks to send out, and So we're probably right at 118,000 that we've given out since 2019.
Wow. Sure.
And to me, that's good because, we have fundraisers, but we don't make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But the money is there. And that's one thing I told him. I said, give me money to set up the next event and to always have money to hand out. We've gotten low before, and I've really worried about it. But, we don't have a big batch of money in the bank, and none of us get paid. I don't get paid. All my time is given, and I think Zach knew that too.
Yeah.
But I don't mind it at all. I don't mind it at all. I just keep praying for God to give me the strength to continue on.
Sure. What do you think about? I mean, obviously, like what I've run across with all these officers that'll say, "Well, Miss Vicki Moak," and I always laugh and say, "I do." All of them are just really kind of moved by the fact that you were able to take that to bring beauty from the ashes, for lack of a better way to put it. I think that is the best way to put it.
And when we checked on it, when Max checked on it, we couldn't find another one in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
which is odd.
Yeah.
It's odd that you don't have another, and so I mean, I'm hoping for it to spread because there's so many that don't even know what we do.
Right.
And Facebook is not my friend.
It's not been my friend either. Well, and so now you don't just help folks whose family members have been killed. I remember when Anthony Fox was imprisoned, we talked about, and you and his mother got in touch,
Got
I
in
think.
touch, yeah.
There have been people who've been in accidents that you've helped.
Yes.
So it's not just about line of duty death. There have been other situations as well.
Yes, because it's sad that when an officer's in a wreck or injured, and when they go home, that workman's comp.
It's not what you think it is.
It's not what you
No.
think it is. So I mean, we helped one officer that was in a bad accident, lives up north Mississippi, and I guess I'm going to say it's probably almost a year later. One of the officers called me and said, "Miss Vicki," said, "I just got off the phone with him. He's crying." He said, "He's still going through physical therapy. He's still not able to work." And he said, "They've got one car, and they're fixing to repo it."
Oh, gosh.
And I said, "Well, find out what the payoff is." I said, "If you can ask them to find out what it is." And it wasn't a whole, wasn't a lot, but we paid off that car. We had the money. I messaged my board and I said, "Can we pay?" And all of them said yes. Because sometimes, if it's a need, we want to be able to meet it, and I said, if they give up that car, they're not going to have a way to go, or,
Yeah.
his wife to go to work or anything like that.
I think that is one of the big misconceptions, because even I remember in 2016 when Lee Tart died, there was a reserve officer who was hurt in a motorcycle accident I believe it was as they were taking Lee's body. There was a motorcycle accident, and Kenny Engel was his name. And because he was reserve, there was almost nothing in place for him. And so he was badly injured. And, I just remember talking to his family, and they're like, "We don't know what we're going to do next." But that's where you guys step in some of these
Yes,
cases.
we step in. When I tell, as a matter of fact, we had the Wildlife Expo in Brookhaven, and
Yeah.
I had a booth there, and I met some of the mounted
Yeah.
highway patrol. And, when I told him, I said, really, I depend on all of you. If you're officers out there and somebody is injured or anything, because a lot of times I don't hear about it. It's word of mouth. And that's what I need. I want to make sure I'm helping everybody. So if anything happens, just pick up the phone and call.
That's right. We have a whole lot of law enforcement that listens to this podcast or that watch the video. You heard it here. If you can't get Miss Vicki yourself, you can get in touch with us, and we will get you in touch with her as well. So before we go, tell us, is there anything that you would want people to know either about Zach or about Warriors of the Badge that we wouldn't know how to ask you?
I guess the main thing I would ask of right now, because Facebook's not my friend,
Right.
is when we have events, share it for me. It only goes so far, and that's really what we need. We need the word out a lot better, we need to, and I'll tell people as we're doing events, I'll tell them, I say, look, I don't care if you have $1 in your pocket. Come. I said, because that's what people out here, that's what our government and everybody needs to see, that how much people support you, not just by writing something, every now and then about, how you feel about it. Come out and stand, be there if they're there. If you see them on the street, shake their hand and tell them that you stand for them. That's what they need to do. But yeah, one of the things right now would be to share our events, to pick up the phone and call me if there's a need. And I tell you what, if Zach was here right now, you know what he would do?
What? I don't know. Well, and so y'all have something. Do you have something coming up?
Yes, we have our 7th annual poker ride. And I changed it to ride because I had on our first flyer of poker run and had so many people call me, I don't run. I'm sorry, I can't be there. And I'm like, it's not a run, it's a ride. And so I changed it. But yeah, this is our 7th. Zach rode motorcycles. And so this is really my little thing to remember him every year. And we do it in October. His birthday is Saturday.
Oh, wow.
And so we try to get it kind of close to his birthday, but cruising the coast, we have to inch around it. So we got it. And it's not just motorcycles, it's cars, Jeeps, trucks, come fly your flags. And Zach's car usually leads, and we just stay in one group. And they seem to enjoy that. I know most of them, they wait until, you have to wait around until everybody comes back. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of person to wait till 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening for somebody to come back to see if their hand won. Mm-hmm. And so they stay in one wad. And a couple of years ago, it took longer than I thought. And I said, oh, they're going to be mad at me because this has been a longer ride. And we come back and I said something to somebody. I said, no, we just pulled over at one of our stops and we all just visited and talked, and we had the best time. So that's what I want. I want them to come out and join us. And no matter what you're riding in, and just back roads riding, music blaring, just having a fun time.
Sounds good. And tell us again, what are the dates and how do people find out more?
October the 25th is the poker ride, and it's at the Lincoln Civic Centers where we'll start. And this year we're going to go down. I've got to talk back with them, but we're going to go down to Summit and honor Troy Floyd. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go to the Macomb PD and honor Jason Blake. And we'll probably do some off turns on the different areas. But you'll draw your first card at the Civic Center and 4 while you're out on the road, and come back. And whoever has the best hand wins the money pot. And we'll have food for you. And so just come out, ride your vehicle, and come on out. If you back the blue, come. Any first responders, come.
Good deal. Amanda, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just love what you're doing. I think that other states in law enforcement have prepared their departments to know how to plan a funeral, to help the families with certain things. And this is just, unfortunately, one of those things that Mississippi has not caught up with.
Right.
But that's okay, because we have people who are doing it for our state, and I think eventually our state will catch up. So just keep on doing what you're doing, and thank you.
Thank y'all for having me.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed it.
Well, I am honored that you would let us tell Zach's story today. Thank you for that.
Zach's up there with that crooked smile.
Yeah.
That famous crooked smile.
That's right. Well, thank you guys for listening and for watching. And we hope that if you have any questions about Warriors of the Badge, that you'll reach out to Miss Vicki. Again, if you can't reach Vicki Moak is her name again, in case you missed it, then you can reach out to Amanda or myself as well, and we'll get you in touch. Thanks for joining us. If you want to sponsor us, hit us up. We're on all the major podcast platforms. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all the things. So look for us, and we will see you next week right here on Investigation Homicide. Have a good night.